don't know why, but recently there seems to be this misty aura in my camera. No matter how much I clean the lens, it just feels sort of foggy. But I guess that's kind of appropriate for this time of year because we're getting deep into autumn now. So it's sort of fun to have this like spooky, misty aura around me. But I want to do a book haul today, talking about recent books that I've acquired. There's a whole lot of like really exciting things that have been published in October. But first, I just want to say how last night I went to see the writer Armistead Maupin speaking in London, and he was so funny and really entertaining and interesting. He's had such a fascinating life, and he was interviewed by Neil Gaiman, which was really exciting. And I've only read the very first book in the Tales of the City series, but of course I watched the entire film series with Laura Linney, which was so brilliant and wonderful. But one great thing I got last night was this beautiful big like broadsheet of Michael's coming out letter. So this is Michael, the character from the Tales of the City series, and it's been published on this lovely broadsheet, and of course this is Michael's coming out letter, but really it's Armistead's coming out letter that he sent to his mother, and it's signed at the bottom by him. So that's just a lovely thing that I got last night. But speaking of sort of autumnal season and spooky season, I mean, it's funny how for almost most readers, this seems to be our favorite season of the year. And I don't know why that is. I mean, I think it's sort of my favorite season of the year too. But I mean, I guess it's because summer is gone and now we have an excuse to sit inside all the time reading as much as we want to as the weather gets colder and all of that. So I have a number of sort of seasonal appropriate books, because it's almost Halloween. So talking about sort of spooky stories. And first off, I have this really beautiful new Virago edition of Edith Wharton's Ghost Stories, which I didn't even know that she wrote ghost stories. But yeah, so these are slightly spooky stories. And Edith Wharton is another author I love so much. I probably should have counted her as one of my favorite authors as well. But it has an introduction by Kelly Link as well. And it is just a gorgeous book. So I'm looking forward to tucking into some of these over the autumnal season, Halloween season. And Virago have also published this book of short stories of Book of Witches, and it's edited by Shahrukh Husain, and these are sort of stories which deal with different forms of witches over the ages, who've taken many different sort of shapes and forms in folklore and stories, and it collects them all together in this book to show a full variety. Andrew Michael Hurley also has a new novel out called Star of Acre, and you can't get a more autumnal looking book than this as well. And he seems to really specialize in this almost gothic sensibility of sort of small town insulated life, rural life, and the emotional and psychological struggles of characters in different families. And this story concerns a couple whose young child sadly dies at a young age, and the different steps that they tried to take to recover from that, whether that's dealing with an occult practice of trying to contact this lost child or through other methods. So this sounds, I've really enjoyed his first two novels, so I'm very much looking forward to this as well. I also have another little book of short stories called The 12 Strange Days of Christmas, which are all ghost stories as well. And I love how quite often it feels like Halloween can sort of like bleed into Christmas a bit with, the whole sort of Nightmare Before Christmas type thing. And so I think these short stories play upon that whole tradition. And then there's a book called Edgar Allan Poe and the Empire of the Dead. And I think this sort of mystery series, which draws into it the author Edgar Allan Poe. And in this novel, Edgar Allan Poe goes to Paris and is working to solve a mystery. And I don't know, I'm not really sure whether I would like this or not. I mean, it might be fun to just sort of dip into and see what I think of it. The author Kate Mayfield is a fan of this series, so and I like her books. So yeah, it'll be interesting to try. And also Joyce Carol Oates has a new novel of suspense called The Pursuit, which has a very creepy, spooky cover on it as well. And it's about a child named Abby who has this recurring nightmare of wandering through a field filled with bones and skulls, and it gradually reveals why she keeps having this recurring nightmare over the course of the novel. And like I talked about in a recent video, it was bookshop day coming up soon. So on that day, I bought a number of books that I'm really excited to read. So I went on a bit of a poetry book buying binge, and I bought 3 books by Anne Carson, because I talked about recently how I want to read Anne Carson because she's going to be coming to London soon to give a talk, and so thank you for all of your suggestions of what Anne Carson to start with, and one of the ones that kept coming up was Autobiography of Red, and yeah, this sounds really good, so looking forward to reading this. And then I also got The Beauty of the Husband, which was in that list of 100 best books of the century so far that I talked about recently. And then there's some essays, Glass and God, that she wrote, and I think one of these is sort of about the Brontes, and of course I went to Bronte country for the first time recently, so that sort of fits in with this, and Alex was talking about this book on his channel recently, so yeah, I was eager to read this as well. And then I also got another couple books of poetry of poets that are nominated for the Forward Prizes. And I'm going to be going to there's a whole series of readings from authors nominated for the Forward Prizes this weekend. So I wanted to get some poetry from authors for that. And so there's Fiona Benson with a book called Vertigo and Ghost, which I guess goes with the sort of whole autumnal theme again. And then there's Mary Jean Chen with her book called Fleche, which is a French word, but also when you say it aloud, it sounds like flesh, and so has a sort of double meaning, which she's consciously playing upon. And Jen Campbell on her channel, she talked about this. I think she made a whole video dedicated to this book and dissecting some poems from it, because she makes these great videos of dissecting poems and really taking them apart and looking at them a lot of different ways in a way which is so great and really interesting and fun. And finally, on Bookshop Day, I bought the novel called Crossing, which Garth Greenwell has really praised this novel. So it's about a young man growing up in Albania who finds himself marginalized and that he can't stay there. And so his process of migration across Europe and to the United States and coming out as a gay man and his experiences through that whole journey. So it sounds like such a good book, so I'm very eager to read this. Then I have a novel called Upturned Earth by Karen Jennings, and this is set in South Africa in the late 1800s, and is about a mining community and how that community is made up of a whole mixture of people from different cultures and different countries, but how they come together in the name of this industry. And it's published by Handheld Press, which makes really beautiful editions. I really love the covers and the way that they publish their books. And I also have another book from South Africa called Moffie. And this was a novel published a number of years ago about a young Afrikaan man white Afrikaan man who's growing up in South Africa and is forced to do national service during the time of apartheid. And he's forced to fight in the army that's trying to uphold the apartheid regime, which is really terrifying, but also he's a young gay man, and so he has to hide his sexuality because gay men are referred to as Moffies in South Africa, which is, I think, basically translates to the same sort of insulting word as fag. And I saw a film was made of this recently, and I saw it at the London Film Festival recently. It was a really beautiful, but really like devastating, sad film, but really well done and such a powerful story. And it's terrifying to me to think about what it must be like to be forced to go into the military service and have to hide yourself like this and be in this hyper masculine environment, which is incredibly toxic. And like a lot of young men committed suicide during this time of being forced into service like this. And yeah, it's such a powerful story. I have a new Everyman's edition of Elizabeth Bowen's collected short stories, and I think all of Everyman editions are really beautiful, and this book is no exception. And you can look at the cover, and it has a new introduction by John Banville. And Elizabeth Bowen is a writer who died in 1973, I think, but I've never read any of her fiction before, so I think this will be a great way to dip into her stories and get a sense of her style. Car Park Life by Gareth E. Rees, and this has a really interesting subject matter. So the author traveled across the country going to different car parks, which are spaces that people don't normally think to visit and explore, but he takes this as a subject matter to think about all the different things that happen in car parks, whether it's skateboarding or drug deals or dogging or even murder, and he looks at all these different occurrences that happen in these spaces, which are sort of these blank liminal spaces, but looks at them at sort of the significance they have within our culture. So I think it's a really unique subject matter. Survival Math by Mitchell S. Jackson, and this is a memoir where the author is looking back on his life growing up in Portland, Oregon, and calculating his chances of survival, what they were amidst the rates of death in his community at that time, which was filled with a lot of guns and gangs and sex work, so a lot of violence. So he reflects on his personal experience, but looking at how that's indicative of sort of American culture as a whole. And this book has blurbs on the back from authors like Salman Rushdie and Cheryl Strayed and Jasmine Ward, who Jasmine Ward says, "It's relentlessly clear-eyed and virtuosic. Survival Math offers revelation after revelation. In the end, it remakes our understanding of the world and those in it." The Winter Soldier by Daniel Mason, and this is a historical novel set in World War I in Vienna about a young medical student who's only 22 years old, but because the war is occurring, finds himself drawn into army life and having to assist with the wounded in a sort of terrifying state, even though he's only a medical student, so he's not a full doctor, but he finds himself having to care for a lot of patients, even though he doesn't have the complete knowledge yet, which is a sort of terrifying situation. And one soldier who comes in has a number of strange drawings on him. So the story sort of follows the mystery behind that soldier that he meets there. Bellevue, and this is a novel which won the 2019 EU Prize for Literature, and it's about a character named Blanca who is living in the French city of Marseille and takes a summer job at an institution where caring for people with severe physical disabilities. It's about their experiences with that and the transition of going from the carer to being the person who needs to be cared for. The Diver's Game by Jessie Ball, and this is an author who I've always meant to read, and this has a very striking cover to it. I think it's a sort of dystopian novel taking place in a city that's become very divided by class, and is about two girls traveling through that city with canisters of killing gas. Still Aside by Sinan Jones, and this is an author who he wrote a short novella called The Cove, which was really powerful and beautiful. He has very poetic style of writing, and this novel, Still Aside, is another. I think it's another sort of dystopian novel about a community where water has become a very precious commodity, and so he's writing about this, I think, in a sort of prophetic way, and so it's about the struggles of that community as they start to fight over the resource of water. This Way to Departures by Linda Mannheim. This is a book of short stories all about people who travel to different countries to make a new life for themselves there. And it's sort of exploring that process of what we lose when we do that, and who do we become in these different places. Like, what do we take with us, and what do we lose? And that's a subject very close to my heart, since I'm an American who now lives in the UK, and so I wrestle with those feelings all the time. And I'm getting to a point where I've lived almost completely half my life in the US and half my life in the UK, so I'm sort of completely 50-50 on this. And this is a short story writer who has fans in writers like Emer McBride, who says that these are restive tales that provoke and abide like a slap. I also got another book of poetry called The Trees by Heather Crystal, and because I seem to be on a bit of a poetry kick, and very shallowly is that a word? Or shallowy? Anyway, for the shallow reason, I got this book just because I thought the cover was really beautiful. I mean, it's almost Christmassy, the construction of the cover. But yeah, I was just drawn to it, and so I'm really intrigued to read it. The Light in the Dark by Horatio Clare, and I should talk about this before when I was talking about transition from autumn to winter, because that's what this book is all about, sort of mapping that process and how our emotions change over the seasons like that. Shame on Me by Tessa McWatt. And this is a book all about national and cultural and racial identity, and looking about how we are all strands of lots of different cultures and races, and looking at that whole complex question and why it becomes such a question that we're asked, and why people want to identify us, right away, of who are you and where do you come from. And so, yeah, looking at that whole big complex issue. So yeah, I'm really eager to read this book. Faces on the Tip of My Tongue by Emmanuel Pagano. And these are short stories which are all about the mad and the mysterious and the dispossessed in rural France. So they sound like more kind of spooky tales for this sort of season. Make It Scream, Make It Burn by Leslie Jameson. And this has a very spooky cover on it as well, though I don't think these essays are supposed to be particularly spooky. But I've never read this writer before, but I've heard she's very strong writing and has fans with writers like Eleanor Catton and Maggie Nelson and Stephen King. So a whole range of writers really praise this author. So yeah, I'm keen to try her work. Then I have two books by the same writer, Denise Riley, and this is a new edition of her book called Time Lived Without Its Flow. It's a really beautiful edition, and it comes with an introduction by the writer Max Porter. And it's about, she writes about her process of when her child died and her process of grieving in that. And then taking a sort of another perspective on grief, there's a book of her selected poems, which is also really beautiful, has this sort of gleaming cover, but yeah, it's sort of a different form of writing looking at that subject matter. Unicorn by Amru Al-Kadhi, and this has really beautiful, striking cover, and I've heard such great things about this memoir. So it's about the author's experiences growing up as a young gay man in Iraq, and the process of coming out to his family, of sort of declaring one day that he's in love with Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone, and the bad reaction that comes from that, and then his process of discovering that he wants to become a drag queen and moving to the United Kingdom, and his experiences doing that. And yeah, I just heard this is such a great book from a number of people, so very eager to read this memoir. Very excitingly, Zadie Smith has published her very first book of collected short stories called Grand Union. So I've been dipping into these and reading a few of these aloud to my partner. If I talk about how I read aloud to my partner sometimes. So yeah, so I've been reading these aloud because they're quite short, so they're good for that. But I've been really enjoying them, and she has such an intelligent way of approaching her characters and looking at all these different lives. And then finally, very excitingly, I have Elizabeth Strout's new novel, Olive Again, and this is her sequel to her novel, Olive Kitteridge, and this, of course, in our year of lots of literary sequels that have been coming out, and I'm so excited to revisit this character. I mean, this is a character she's very difficult and very spiky, and somebody that I would never want to meet in real life, but I'm very excited to meet her again in fiction because she's such a fascinating person. I mean, I think essentially a very good person, but one of these very difficult characters who has trouble relating to people, and so it's looking at her further life when I think she has another marriage, and then trying to reconnect with her sons who she's sort of estranged with, and so very excited to read this again. So those are all the books I want to talk about. Let me know if you've read any of them, which you think I should start with first, and which ones you're most interested in reading now. So hope you're enjoying this transition into deep autumn and the slow move into the winter season. And I'll speak to you again soon. Bye, everyone.